What's up, everyone? D.H. Thorne here. One thing that modern science struggles to rationalize is why a dead, unconscious universe would ever evolve consciousness, so-called, in the first place. By consciousness, I do not mean the ability to think or reason. That is cognition. Consciousness plays a role in that process as witness. So by consciousness, I don't mean thoughts or reason. That is not the same thing as consciousness in my vocabulary. Consciousness is all-encompassing. It is the subjective witnessing of experience, or the experiencing of experience itself. The taste of chocolate, the color of a rainbow, for example. A calculator does not know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. It doesn't need to know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. It is an automatic process. It is purely deterministic. The point here is that there is absolutely nothing that our bodies or minds do that cannot be done in darkness, that is, without consciousness witnessing it. Your body and mind, according to science, are a lot like a calculator. They believe that your brain and the processes therein are deterministic, at least to some degree. There may be probability involved, it may have something to do with quantum, this and that, but that alone would simply randomize the output of the calculator. It doesn't actually constitute consciousness. Now, this is a well understood fact in both science and philosophy because there's a concept called the Turing test. The idea is that an AI could impersonate a human so well that you couldn't tell. It's also there in the I think, therefore I am, or all of those kind of existential questions. How do we know anybody else is conscious? For all we know, everybody's just a robot that just acts conscious. We all intuitively know that there is a difference between thought or reason and an individual's awareness of those thoughts / reason. And it is perhaps consciousness which discerns, or it may be something else which discerns what is true and what is false. But either way, the mechanism of thoughts or reason are absolutely not equal to awareness or consciousness. They shouldn't be confused for the same thing. Now, at least according to materialists, and especially hard determinists, one does not need the subjective experience of taste or color or anything else really in order for things to exist or for humans to exist and function as human beings. We don't need to be aware of the taste of chocolate to eat a cheeseburger or have chocolate. We don't need that. There's absolutely no necessity because everything that can be done by the mind, does it require a witness for it to work? Does a calculator require you to witness it for it to work? According to objectivity, no. If you're an objectivist, no. By the way, I'm not strictly an objectivist. We'll get into that in a minute. In theory, all of our mental and cognitive functions should and could operate just as they do now without awareness, according to the materialistic model, the objectivist model. But there it is. We all do have subjective awareness of these things. We are all the witness of these things. The sense of self is not the thoughts or feelings. That's what most spiritual traditions are trying to tell you, is to look past what you think of it as yourself, the body-mind, look at the psyche and look at consciousness. That's who you are. The self is the witness of those things. The true self is consciousness witnessing both the psyche, the mind, the body, all of these things. So let us go back to the beginning. Why did cold, dead matter evolve the ability to witness or have subjective experience at all? If that subjective experience, i.e., the experience of the taste of chocolate, if it serves no function other than entertainment, basically, if your mind can function without consciousness witnessing it, like a calculator, according to material science, then Ergo, we don't need to have conscious awareness of that experience. It's redundant, is what I'm saying. Why would the universe evolve that? Why would it go to the trouble? Especially if evolution is a mindless thing, which it is. It's not something with intention. It doesn't think. It's not an egregore, although it's kind of become one. But in it itself, it's a natural process. It's determinative, right? It's built in determinism. So why? Why would it develop the ability to feel, to sense subjectively? I don't mean to have the ability to detect. The calculator can detect when you're typing the keys. Otherwise, it couldn't work. But it has no conscious awareness of that typing. Your calculator, your phone, your keyboard, none of those things have conscious awareness of your fingers tapping them, do they? Maybe they do. But in the materialist, physicalist perspective, no, it doesn't. So it doesn't need subjective conscious awareness at all. Now, one could argue, I suppose, that while we no longer need it, it is some kind of vestigial development that lingers on. Maybe some amoeba developed it a long time ago, and that's what we are talking about. And it was just a fluke. You see where we're going here? They're kind of reaching a little bit. But then that requires evidence that it was ever in fact needed in the first place. There is no argument. Think of it this way. Does a television need a witness? Does your television need someone to watch it? Or will it play its movie without you? If you're an objectivist, you say yes. I won't even get into the whole rebuttal of that. We'll just stick with that analogy, that relationship. According to materialism and objectivism, basically, your television does not need you. It doesn't need a witness. So why does your mind need one? Why does your body need one? If everything that your mind and body does is a bunch of natural deterministic processes, why does it need consciousness, a witness at all? Does it not have enough internal consistency, causality, interplay, relationships within itself to just function? Clearly, when a person is in a deep coma and we don't believe that they are conscious, I'm not saying that they're not, I'm going again by material objectivism, that body is functioning without anything in it, without a witness there. Clearly it can survive, at least if it gets food. And for all we know, again, according to that philosophical question, how do we know anyone else exists but ourselves? There's solipsism, of course. But how do we know? How do we know? How do you know your best friend is conscious and isn't just a robot that looks conscious to you? You don't. So either there is a need for a witness of subjective experience, in which case then you've got to explain how witnessing affects what is witnessed in a dualistic sense, like somehow observation changes things. That's why we have a problem with the observer effect in science. Because by virtue of just being aware of something, that shouldn't change it unless there's some kind of an interplay. And they can't figure out what that interplay is. So, ergo, they're stuck. That's why it's one of those things that they're still working on. So either there is a need for a witness of subjective experience, aka consciousness, or there isn't. And I have yet to see one philosopher or scientist make the case that any living thing needs to have subjective awareness at all. According to science, the brain and its activity is primary, and consciousness is a secondary or emergent faculty. To them, consciousness is an emergent phenomenon, which is absurd because consciousness is not a phenomenon. It is that which witnesses the phenomenon. It is transcendental. It transcends the phenomena. All of them. Modern science, however, and academia are trying very hard to make the case that life is nothing more than an emergent property of dead physical substances when placed into just the right configuration and set in some kind of motion energetically. As if a clock could be built in just the right way, wound up and let go, and somehow that clock would spontaneously generate the ability to taste and witness color. Sounds stupid, doesn't it? This is madness. It is so, and they can't explain it, so it is madness. There is so blatantly obvious, especially to certain schools of philosophy, that one could safely assume, if you're in one of those schools of philosophy, which I am, that there may be, and in my opinion, absolutely is, an intent somewhere along the line at the top to deceive everybody about this. They don't want you to know. Why? I know this sounds conspiratorial, and people will be tuned out because of that, because people have been programmed to reject anything that sounds like conspiracy theory. Any suggestion that there might be corruption in a edifice of such splendorous respect as academia, as if science is above reproach. No, someone is desperately trying to push humanity back down the spiritual evolutionary ladder. They want us to be mindless NPC drones, completely without internal awareness, or if there is internal awareness, that internal awareness is enslaved to this robot that doesn't care. Literally, biological androids with no soul. The entire academic institution, with very few exceptions, both public, private, social media, watch PBS Spacetime, watch these shows, they are cold and dead. They don't even have the true spirit of wonder that some of the old-timey scientists have. They are very cold. Oh, they put on a happy woke face about it. But every word is filled with cold, dead, spiritless, soulless implication. So, the entire academic institution, both public, private, social media, with very few exceptions, is so deeply indoctrinated into this ideology of soullessness, of consciouslessness, or consciousness as an emergent property of the brain, that most of them don't even know that they're even doing it anymore. They're not bad people. I'm not saying the average scientist or the guy that hosts PBS Spacetime are bad people that have evil intentions. I'm thinking someone either way in the past or above them at the school, someone somewhere in the line said, let's keep this going so that people don't figure it out. You see, the hard problem of consciousness is only hard if you assume it is not a fundamental quality of reality itself. Not part of it, but properly understood to be one and the same thing, or one with the fundamental nature of reality in some way. At least panpsychism, at the very least, makes this effort to suggest that consciousness is equally important as existence. Although they still dualize it as some separate thing, they're on a better track, at least. It's wrong, but at least they're on the right track, or a better track. At least they're parallel. At least they're going parallel to the truth. Existence is consciousness, is vast boundlessness. Each of these three concepts, existence, vastness, and consciousness, are the same thing. They're all words pointing at the same fundamental mystery equally. The reality we perceive as tables, chairs, stars, those are all a reflection of existence, consciousness, and vast boundlessness itself as it gazes into itself. It's like closing your eyes and trying to imagine what you really are. Imagine you are a what they call a Boltzmann brain or something, some mind that just appears in nothingness, trying to figure out what it is with no external source of comparison. Imagine you are the only thing in existence trying to figure out what you are. You're going to start daydreaming about it. You're going to start imagining yourself. Am I this? Am I that? And maybe a whole universe erupts in that process. That's just one possibility. I'm not saying that's what's happening. Just imagine for a moment, though, that possibility. Then you realize that this is, in many ways, what the ancient philosophers and masters of the original ancient mystical mystery schools would tell you. These were not stupid people. They were well aware of the physical world around them. They understood that if you drop something, it falls and there appears to be natural laws. They didn't go against science. They started science. But they never placed science above metaphysics because they understood that metaphysics is the root and science is there to either explore what grows out of that root or justify it in some way, or technologicize, routinize it in some way, turn it into a tool. But none of them dared do away with metaphysics because they knew that that was like pulling the rug out from under reality itself. Modern materialists don't get this at all. They're completely clueless to it because they've been indoctrinated into a worldview where they cannot approach these questions without feeling uncomfortable. We'll get to that in a little bit. So they all ultimately leaned into what in the modern era we might all call some form of non-dual idealism, monism, pantheism. Even Aristotle wasn't so bold to deny consciousness as having fundamental and higher importance, and he was sort of the father of modern materialism in many ways. He and Plato would sort of, there's that famous picture of Aristotle going like this, suggesting that the material world was the root, and Plato pointing up, the old, almost the Baphomet thing. They were comparing which was true, and they both need to be brought together. That's non-duality in a sense. Non-duality says both of those are expressions of those two things. Or I should say non-duality, those two things are expression of the non-dual source. Pardon me. I think I misspoke. Now, I would argue that for anyone who hasn't attained some mystical revelation through gnosis or samadhi or whatever, a truly rational approach would be to simply treat both as possible answers to the same question and not disregard all these other options like idealism or non-duality as just mystical woo. But they've been indoctrinated into being objectivists, which means anything subjective to them is less real. Meanwhile, to the mystic, objectivity is an emergent, conditional, consensual matrix. It is not reality. It is an emergent mirage of reality. It is a manifestation, and a very, very distorted one. So when you do not know, you must, of course, investigate in a pragmatic and efficient manner. You cannot just try everything all at once, obviously. They can't just follow every nook and cranny at the same time. They do need to focus on one possibility, but they've done it in such a way where they've become dogmatic. The fact that modern science scoffs so hard at the idea that physicality may be an illusion, is an illusion, in my opinion, through experience, validated. The fact that modern science scoffs at the idea that physicality is an illusion, especially when the higher echelons of new physics are like a gnat's whisker away from some truly esoteric shit or some form of mathematical idealism, or perhaps something that Kant would approve of. The fact that they're that close to that, and yet you still have the majority are screaming and railing against any notion that consciousness is more than just an emergent property of a dead brain. In my opinion, there's an agenda at play here very clearly. Like with the climate crisis, the vax hullabaloo, wearing masks, all the political shit, religion going back to antiquity, there's an agenda at play. Anybody who thinks these things happen organically without somebody pushing or, putting their thumb on the scale to make sure it goes a certain way, you don't know anything. You're not paying close enough attention. We all know that there's political motivations, be they left, right, or personal. There's at the very least nepotistic shit going on in academia where someone wants their back scratched, so they go a certain way. They get along to get along, and they form clubs and cliques, and at the very least, at that level, there's corruption. But I believe there's corruption that goes further than that. There's a source of that corruption. There is a group. Somebody doesn't want you to know. Call me paranoid. Call me paranoid for having eyes wide open. Yes, someone who can see is more likely to be worried or to notice when things are off. If you just have your head in the sand and buried in a book and believing what they tell you, of course you're not paranoid. I don't think I'm paranoid. I think I see clearer than you. Someone had to shape it this way on purpose. So call me paranoid. But I believe I see it with eyes that are unclouded by paranoia. I'm a pattern recognition machine. I have an IQ of about a 140. I could be in Mensa probably. I'm not an irrational person. I may be a little crazy. But this only makes sense under two circumstances. Nearly all of academia and science are totally hubristic, egocentric morons that somehow become brilliant about other stuff. Or there is a nefarious agenda to indoctrinate and otherwise force people to conform to specific dogma like the church used to do. This is why I refer to Christianity and Islam and some of these other, Abrahamism as a monotheistic cultural centerpiece. That is the operating system, the Piscean operating system of the Matrix. It's like the Pisces edition of the Matrix, if you will, like Windows 98. That was Pisces edition Matrix when it was all based on spiritual bullshit. Not even higher philosophy, just dogmatic belief systems. What's the difference? There's none. I see no difference between that and modern academia. Zero. Sure, a good teacher will pass you with flying colors if you make a good argument against them, even if you don't exactly conform to the material. But how many people would take that chance? How many people of them have the intelligence or critical thinking ability to take that chance to argue with their teacher and still pass? The pressure is not to think, but to conform. And I hate to reduce it down to something so binary as there's an agenda or people are stupid, but there really isn't many other viable or strong arguments that it could be. I personally don't see them, and I've thought about this a lot. Either they're all stupid, or someone wants you to be stupid. Now, yes, you could argue, Thorne, you could be wrong about this. I know I'm not, because what I'm talking about can only be known subjectively. Only you know you exist. I can't prove to you that I exist. I know I exist, and I know I exist because I know it. That witnessing is the source of everything. Existence is equal. Existence, consciousness, boundlessness, or bliss, or contentment, whatever your word for it you want to use. Those three words mean the same thing. They're different words describing qualities of the same enigmatic thing, existence itself. Without those things, you have no existence. They are intrinsic. They're beyond intrinsic. They are reality. You can't know reality any other way. So either that's an illusion or what you experience is illusory. Which one has the fewer moving parts? Which one is the simpler explanation? So I am very confident in what I believe because it's not a belief, it's knowledge. I believe I can argue for it, but I know it to be true. So we know, based on all the evidence, data points, we know that the scientific establishment can be influenced by money and power. We can argue all day long that science is objective and what links they go to remain objective and unbiased, but you cannot deny that science follows funding and that scientists themselves are indoctrinated into certain worldviews and ideologies just by virtue of being educated the way they are. They're not bad people. They just don't have a metaphysical background. If they did, then it would be fine. But they don't. They confuse the scientific ideologies of materialism and physicalism for metaphysics. And metaphysics have debunked materialism and physicalism so many times in antiquity. And you can debunk it subjectively, instantly with the right meditation or the right entheogenic activity. By the way, that latter one may be illegal where you are, so I can only recommend your meditation. So the good ones are taught or instinctively learn to stay truly neutral. Scientists, I mean. They learn to set aside their biases when doing good science. They don't assume that consciousness is fundamental or not. If they don't know, they both are on the table. But you don't see that. Plus, consciousness itself is not objective. I can't take consciousness out and show it to you. No one can verify consciousness. There's no way to prove anyone is conscious or has consciousness. That's why the definition of consciousness that the materialists use is different than the one the metaphysician uses. The materialists, it's a bunch of phenomenon. It's you respond to a stimulus. That proves your that's not consciousness. That just means you have a reflex, and a reflex could be, you could be dead inside, no soul, no consciousness at all, and still react. Calculators do it all the time. So, consciousness is not objective. That is a fact, not an opinion. It is subjectiveness, or I should say its subjectiveness, is the root of the conundrum. Science and modern philosophy is objectivist, meaning it deals primarily with objective phenomenon and not subjective reality. That is, it is focused solely on appearances or manifestation. And this invokes the clay bowl analogy, which I love to use. The clay bowl analogy demonstrates the point that when we are confronted by a clay bowl, the bowl itself is an emergent manifestation of the clay in that form. This means the clay is actually the fundamental nature of the bowl, not the bowl. The bowl is a secondary or emergent thing. The bowl exists purely because the clay exists, and the clay has been shaped to resemble a bowl. This means the bowl is less real. So this teacup is less real than the substance that the teacup is made of, whatever that is. The bowl is less real than the clay because it is temporary. It is a temporary state the clay is in. It's really clay in the shape of a bowl. Now, I don't mean bowlness, the ideal concept of bowlness, but bowlness is formless. It doesn't look like anything. It is an ideal pattern in which things can appear. Bowlness is almost indescribable in itself because the words we use to describe it are not the bowlness of the bowl. If I say a bowl is a depression in which liquids or other things can fill, that's not always a bowl. Bowlness is something else than the bowl, or the clay, if you will, at least in this analogy. Bowlness is not a bowl. It is the source of all bowls. And it is much closer to the realness of clay than the realness of bowls. In other words, bowlness is more real than bowls are. That is to say, if one was forced to place all of this in a hierarchical pattern of realness, like what's more real and what's least real, the clay is more real than the bowl, and bowlness is either equal to the clay in realness or at least higher in realness than the bowl itself. That is to say, teacupness or coffee cupness is more real than this particular coffee cup. And more real than either of those would be the substance in which this coffee cup is manifest. And you could argue that bowlness is either equally as real as the clay or less real. Depends on how hard into idealism you lean. So, why? You can take the bowl out of the clay and still have both clay and bowlness. Bowlness can't be taken away just because you smash the bowl. The concept, the Platonic ideal of a bowl is immortal. You can't destroy that. It exists before even your mind does. It exists before anyone does, because clearly bowlness is a potential that all reality can take, that all clay can assume. It is a potential. So it is potential is part of the source. So you could argue successfully, in my opinion, that ideal form in its source nature is equal to existence, consciousness, and boundless vastness. So you can take the bowl out of the clay and still have clay and bowlness. those two will continue to exist on forever, at least compared to the bowl itself. You can smash the bowl, but it's still clay in the form of hardened clay. And bowlness, that's an ideal form that can be applied to other substances or other clay. You could take some wood and make a bowl out of it. It doesn't have to be clay. Bowlness is actually higher in this actual analogy than the clay is, because technically bowlness exists whether there's clay or not. So we're overthinking the analogy now, but you get the point. The bowl in that equation is the most illusory part of the entire affair. And it is the bowl which is the most phenomenal part of the whole affair. Put another way, science, its job is to focus on the bowl, the phenomenon. The mistake science makes is that it mistakes the bowl itself for the ceramic clay, or the bowlness of the bowl. It outright ignores the actual clay and the actual bowlness, always in favor of the bowl itself. If you ask a typical objectivist what I'm holding, they're going to say a coffee cup. And I have to work them through this logical arrangement of ideas to get them to recognize that coffee cup is a derivative or emergent property of the ceramic. There is no such thing as a coffee cup. Coffee cup is what we call that. They don't exist in themselves. They have no existence outside of existence itself. In other words, they borrow their existence from existence. Except in this case, science doesn't deal with clay bowls or bowlness or any of that shit. They're dealing with atoms, fields, and space-time. But in the clay bowl analogy, all of those things are bowls. None of them are the fundamental substrate of reality itself. And yet they insist that that's what they're dealing with. Hard-headed, dogmatically insist. Atoms, molecules, fields, space-time, all of these things are forms that reality takes. They themselves are not existence or reality or consciousness or the clay of the bowl. They're not even the bowlness of the bowl. Natural laws, at least, are nearly bowlness. They're close. When science starts talking about natural laws like E equals mc squared or something, that is a syntactical or linguistic representation of what E equals mc squared means. And what it means is bowlness. It's the equivalent of bowlness. E equals mc squared describes bowlness. And I don't mean bowlness literally. I mean equally in that analogy. E equals mc squared describes something indescribable. It describes the relationship between two phenomenon, energy and matter. And the nature of that relationship, that's its ideal form. That is its bowlness. That is its realness. That is its formness. That is its form. Its platonic form is E equals mc squared. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what that would be. So all of these things are ultimately phenomenon. Or phenomena, I guess the right thing to say is that's plural. None of them are truly fundamental. Atoms are not fundamental. They're more fundamental than, if you're a reductionist anyway, they're more fundamental than the object. But I would argue, are they really? Or are they derivative of the object? If you're talking about atoms, you're talking about dividing something until you get to the smallest part before you can't break it any further. Oh, wait, you can keep breaking it. So really what we're talking about is the old question of, if you break down a rock, is a rock made of pebbles or are pebbles made of rock? If you break down pebbles and you get sand, does that mean pebbles are made of sand and therefore rocks are made of sand? Or are sands made of rock? Oh, you can break those down into atoms. Does that mean sand is made of atoms or atoms made of rock? You see the problem here? This is what science does, is it breaks things down, labels the parts, and then pretends that somehow those parts make the whole, because they can exist independently of the whole. That's their argument. But that's alone not enough, because you're breaking down a whole. You're breaking down something that is already existing unto itself. So you're actually not getting to its root. You're just breaking the root apart and calling those parts the root of the root. That's not how you get to the root. You've destroyed the root. You've destroyed the source. The source is the root, and then you break that down. So the breakdown is a derivative. None of us experience atoms. We experience detections of atoms through our instruments. Nobody's seen an atom. You never will. It's impossible. But Thorne, they have instruments that can detect them. I didn't say you can't detect them. You can infer them. You can never directly evidence them. You can prove that they function that way. Of course, all of these things are fine. Science is correct about all of that. It's when you get to the fundamental substrate of the question, are atoms real? Well, there's reality, and reality sometimes takes the form of an atom, but atoms are not reality. Atoms are a bowl. Reality is the substrate. Reality is consciousness or the clay or whatever. So none of these things, atoms, fields, space-time, none of these things are fundamental. We know this. The upper echelons of science know this. I'm truly weary sometimes at the lack of wisdom in the world on these very obvious things. But to be fair, it took me most of my life to get here too. So I can't really be mad at them. But it might be different if they made a convincing rebuttal to these understandings, but they don't. If you ever engage with someone fully indoctrinated into these ideas of objectivism, science, materialism, or even subjectivism, you will find that they react like religious fundamentalists do. They act with anger. They act with dismissiveness. They insult you. They act smug towards you. They think you're a woo guy. They will deride you and even dehumanize you in some ways. At the very least, they will relegate you to religion and ignore you. This means they have cognitive dissonance. They're not being objective. They're not being rational. They're not being unbiased. They have dogmatic cognitive dissonance, something indoctrinated. And whenever you encounter such cognitive dissonance, especially when it results in that kind of behavior, you can bet, just about bet the farm even, on the possibility that that person is likely indoctrinated and they're not operating based on objective, unbiased intelligence. They're operating based on societal indoctrination. Whenever you're dealing with societal indoctrination of some kind, it results in a social response, not a rational response. A rational response is to just continue talking and opening your mind to the things that you might be wrong about. A societal response, a social response, is when you respond with social pressure, shunning, insults, stuff like that. People confuse social responses for arguments. You're stupid. That's not an argument. That's a social response. You're just wrong because my professor said so is not an argument. That's an appeal to authority. That means it is a social response. It's sophistry. A rational person with an open mind, properly open, not open so much your brain falls out, but open enough to consider possibilities, doesn't say, that's impossible, that's just woo, you're a spiritual religious quack, get out of my sight. They go, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's explore it a bit and see if it has merit or not. They may or may not believe it. That's fair. That's how it works. That's how everything's supposed to work. You're not supposed to just dismiss it out of hand. And people say, oh, we've been over this. No, you haven't. I guarantee you. And if you're new to this channel, you don't know my stuff, and you're watching this because you thought this was going to be something else, and you're like, wow, this guy's attacking what I believe. Think about it. Have you ever thought about the things I just said? Have you ever deeply explored Advaita or any of these other mystical traditions that are totally comfortable with science? Some of them, some of the best scientists have been deeply involved in those things. Tesla was interested in non-duality for sure. He was absolutely engaged with Vedic mystics. Oh, there you go. Woo again, right? Because it's Tesla. Why do you think they wooed him up so much, even though our entire civilization is based more on Tesla than any other scientist you know? There is no other scientist for whom you have a name that has done more to shape the world you live in than Tesla. I don't mean he invented everything, but the root of just about everything that you enjoy, from televisions to cars to electric cars, would not exist without Tesla and his work. Not alone, obviously, but of the people you can name. You'd need to go with like Heaviside, and because Einstein, did Einstein make the technology that makes your computer possible? No, he did not. He did not invent that. He decided that space is an object and could be curved. His math works, his predictions work, so everyone thinks he's right, but he may not be. You can predict it the same way with other things, by the way. Watch a guy named Ken. What's his name? I always watch his channel, at least I used to. Ken Wheeler. Theoria Apophasis. I'm not saying he's right about everything either, but at least he's talking about it intelligently. But, and this is key, neither materialism, physicalism, or even science has ever debunked the non-dual ideal alternative to physicalism and materialism, ever. They just avoid it now. They just say, we think you're wrong because we presuppose that everything's physical and material, and we just ignore those people. We'll let them at our symposiums if they're a scientist with a doctorate degree. That's fine, but we will not talk about their mystical beliefs in our science symposium. That's why you got people like, Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Kastrup and several others stepping forward who are starting to do a really bang-up job of it, by the way. Love their work. Even if I don't always agree with them, I love their work. So what they do is they just form a consensus of denial, and those handfuls of philosophers and scientists who do at least maintain an open mind about non-dualism or idealism in some form are generally either ostracized and labeled fringe, deeply insulated at the top of their field, and use other words for these ideas to mask them as something physical or otherwise inoffensive to the physical fanatics. They use terms like information instead of ideal forms, or fields, or space-time instead of ether, or mind or consciousness. Me? Or they might even use energy. Me? Honestly, I feel exactly like a former Christian because I love science. I love the study of science. I wanted to be a scientist at one point in my life, so I focused a lot on that subject. Specifically, I was interested in cosmology and things. Space, time, quantum stuff. Not so much quantum, but physics, if you will. Sadly, I sucked at the math, so. But I feel exactly like a former Christian who woke up and realized the dogmatic parts of the religion are bullshit. Doesn't mean everything's bullshit, but the dogmatic parts are bullshit. And I feel like I'm dealing with fundamentalist Christians. I feel like I'm on an uphill battle in a world that is filled with these people and so deeply indoctrinated into a religion that even questioning it can get you in trouble. How many people would listen to my channel and go, wow, this guy sounds intelligent, but he's totally retarded because he's wrong. It's all physical. He's lying. He's dumb. He's not aware of the truth of physicality because he doesn't have a PhD. All the bullshit. Meanwhile, I could think, talk, and work circles around half of these people that would say that. With evidence and argument. But I don't bother because I know I'm dealing with ideologues who are not going to open their minds. So I just put my information out and hope people resonate with it. I know that I cannot, at least at this time, objectively prove reality is not physical or material in nature. If someone could do that, we wouldn't be having this dialogue. But you can't prove a negative. You can't prove physicality is unreal if it's unreal, especially when reality appears in a way that looks physical to us most of the time. All I can do is subjectively prove it to myself, or help you to subjectively prove it to yourself by showing you how I proved it to myself. Meditation, various practices, all of them are available for free all over the internet. I don't have any special secret. If you follow the right practices and contemplations, you will access the evidence. It's not that you are not being indoctrinated. If you're doing this properly, it is an inquisition, or no, bad word. You're being inquisitive. You're inquiring. You're not telling yourself that the universe, see, that's the point. The other side tells you that this is the way it is. The side I'm on says, what if it's this other way? We're asking the question and telling you what our answer is. We tell you, this is what I found. Have you asked the question properly? And you will note that there is no debunk of non-duality that exists. Oh, there's plenty of people who don't like it and try to argue against it, but no one has effectively debunked it. No one has effectively debunked idealism either. And interestingly enough, you kind of can debunk physicality if you know what you're doing. There are strong arguments against physicalism. Very strong. There are none that are strong against non-duality. They say that it's supernatural or mystical woo because they can't touch it. Because it's subjective. They've already stacked the deck against the conversation. Because if it's not objectivist, it's not real to them. They've decided that objective things are real, even though they've never experienced objectivity once in their life. They have no evidence for objectivity at all. Zero. It's all through subjective experience. There is no objective proof in this universe of anything. All you see are two different things that say the same thing. That doesn't mean that they're both right or wrong. You've decided that one is right or one is wrong. You've been told one is right or one is wrong. But you subjectively make that decision. Every objective truth requires a subjective acquiescence to that objective statement. You cannot have objective truth without a subjective, willing, consensual agreement. So subjectivity preempts subjectivity. And what preempts subjectivity? Consciousness itself. This is why it's all so difficult, because modern academia, and the modern mind is purely objectivist in the average person. They're focused entirely on phenomena, and to them, if it cannot be proven objectively, measured, tasted, touched, and smelled, it's simply not real. If it cannot be quantized, it's not real. That is a dogma. That is a dogmatic. If you can't have a linguistic model of it, it doesn't exist. You're placing linguistic models above the reality in that case. If you can't make a mathematical equation about it, it's not real. That's bullshit. Where's your mathematical equation for math itself? You're saying math is fundamental? What would math be without you to perceive it? So meanwhile, the non-dualist or idealist, or the non-dual idealist such as myself, in other words, someone who understands non-duality as the foundation, idealism is the source of manifestation, so it's the next thing in the rung, that would be boldness, and then you have that which is manifested, the bowl itself. That's physicality. In order of reality, you have non-duality, idealism, and then physical manifestation. That means physical manifestation is the least real of the realness of the real things. Idealism is more real than the physical. Your idea of it is more real than it is. This is not a cup. This is something you call a cup. Calling it a cup is more real than what it is. Excuse me, in the objectivist view. It's absurd. We know that non-duality transcends physical. We know that idealism transcends physical. Non-duality is both and neither. And the ideal is rooted in what? In the non-dual paradox. The ideal is rooted in the non-dual paradox of everything and nothing. The ideal comes from it, like a lotus coming up out of mud. Why do you think the Hindus the Hindu traditions like to use the lotus blossom? That's one of the reasons. The physical is rooted in the ideal. But when we say ideal, we don't mean ideas as such, because ideas are objects. Like when you say a cup, to you that's an idea. That's really just linguistics. That's really just an object. I'm talking about idealism. I'm talking about the essence of the word itself. that is unspeakable. Platonic ideals, if you will. So we're talking about the root of the idea, the ideal form, not the objective bowl, but the subjective and enigmatic quality of boldness. That's more real than the bowl. And what makes a bowl and not a cheese knife? That's what it is. Boldness makes a bowl and not a cheese knife. You know the difference. I could call this a cheese knife anytime I want. There's a cheese knife. It's not a cheese knife. Because it has boldness. A cheese knife doesn't generally have boldness. A cheese knife generally does not possess boldness. Okay? A cheese knife, I'm getting tongue-tied here, is possessed of knifeness, right? Stuff like that. And that doesn't mean knifeness itself is an objective reality or subject. It just means that in the hierarchy of realness, it's higher. It's more real than the knife itself. The knife is just substance in a shape. It becomes a knife when you call it that, because it possesses knifeness. You get it? It is a knife by virtue of its knifeness, and its knifeness is by virtue of its existence itself. There's your hierarchy. This is why all the traditional forms of occultism, magic, have that trinity going on. You have material world, the etheric or astral world, and then you have something else, source, which is consciousness, always. Translated out of stupid into intelligent. So boldness would be the intermediary. Knifeness is the intermediary between the source and the manifestation. But all of these things, even boldness itself, is witnessed within consciousness. It's just not an object of consciousness in the same way. We have an awareness of boldness, but not as an object. We can't objectify boldness until we form it into something we can call a bowl or a coffee cup. Coffee cup has boldness. It's a bowl with a handle. Here's Platonic Form Theory 101. Very basic. So, all of these things, why does it matter? You have to understand, this is literally the stuff that dreams are made of. Consciousness is the stuff that dreams are made of. And if reality is made of dream stuff, consciousness, then magic and sorcery are easily possible. Anything is possible. You're not limited to the patterns of phenomenon. Phenomenon are a result of something else. For what they are, or what are they, other than ways to dream more lucidly? Magic and sorcery are just ways to dream more lucidly. That's all they are. And there's no right way or wrong way to do it. There's better ways for individuals, and there's ways that work better for humans than, say, a cat. Magic and sorcery are a way to routinize dreaming life lucidly. But you cannot dream lucidly if you do not first wake up to the fact that it's all a kind of dream. So you have to learn to lucid dream first. That's what your meditation's for. That's what your entheogen practice, whatever it is. That's what your lesser banishing ritual or whatever, your center pillar, your middle pillar, all of these things help with that. Anything that puts you in that I am tetragrammaton, I am God, I am Brahman, I am the one, I am the master of this circle. All of those things get you in touch with the divine. You, the real you, consciousness. They're supposed to, at least symbolically, but that's lost on most people because most people have learned to pantomime and parrot the traditions. They don't understand it. Yes, I have a lot of passion for these things. Can you tell? So you must wake up. If you want to have a lucid dream, you have to wake up to the fact that you're dreaming. Until that happens, you can only dabble. And I'm not saying you can't have, this is the thing, people are so dumb. When they hear me say that, they think, well, that means magic won't work unless you're enlightened, which that's not true because it works for me. Well, that's why in almost every tradition, in Hinduism, for example, siddhis, in other words, magical powers, if you will, are not to be sought after. Certainly not before enlightenment. Why? Because you can attain them before enlightenment and confuse the two. You can gain powers, you can gain magical abilities, you can do strange shit, sometimes just subtle stuff. Most of my powers are subtle. I can't levitate, I can't make you die by blinking at you 3 times, but I can predict your fate. I can do things like I have certain gifts, if you will, subtle ones, which I turn into powers, superpowers of life. Doesn't mean it makes me rich, just makes me a little different, charmed, if you will. But these things can confuse you if you attain these things first. Then the dream just becomes more real. You're not questioning the dream. You don't wake up from it. And until you do, you're still trapped in the dream. Until that happens, you can only dabble. You can have all the power in the world, just like you can have all kinds of superpowers in a dream. But until you're lucid of the fact that you're dreaming, those powers don't really mean anything, because that dream could turn dark. And because you don't know that it's just a dream, you're still going to suffer it. But when we become lucid of the dream, well, that's liberation. You're liberated from its menacing manifestations. And that is also how we truly begin to take part in its manifestation, is to recognize that it's like a dream. That ultimately it is a manifestation of consciousness. This external reality doesn't override it. It is dependent upon it. It is within it. They're a mutually, right? They're one thing. And when that happens, when you attain lucidity, without lucidity, you're lost in the dream. You may have all these powers, but you're lost in it. But when that happens, you begin to realize you're the dreamer of the dream and the dreaming all at once. You're no longer at the mercy of the dream. And when that happens, well, it may or may not happen all at once, but it will happen. That through enlightenment, the development of siddhi often follow, or the ability to use magic and sorcery, if you will, in a Western mindset. Psychic powers, ESP. As you develop enlightenment or transcendence, as you realize what you are fully, then just by virtue of having a higher level of awareness, those things begin to manifest for you too, because you realize there's no limitations. Limitations are all self-imposed. And I don't mean the person, because the person is also manifested. So I don't mean the person controls that. You, behind the person, ultimately choose that. And if you're choosing to be fairly mortal, there's a reason for it. And this is why all true magic requires good, you could call it root work, shadow work, whatever you want to call it. You've got to do that stuff. You've got to clear away the clouds of your psyche to get to know your higher self, your higher guardian angel, or whatever the word you want to use for it. You can externalize it, internalize it, whatever. At some point, you realize you don't need to use a candle and make sigils and shit. You can just go, when the vibe is right, you just go, it's going to be this way. You also know how to shift and choose for it to be a different way. It doesn't always work, but you know that it won't work until you make the choice. So you work in that paradigm. I'm going to choose this reality, and that's the reality I'm going to experience. And it's a subtle choice. It's not a choice that you can make just by declaring it. Declaring it helps. That's the leap of faith. All of these things require a leap of faith. That's doing the ritual. That's doing the sigil. That's making the declaration. That's acting a certain way. They all require a leap of faith. That's taking the fork in the road of the timelines, if you will, whatever model you want to use. You need to make a leap of faith where you trust your intuition. And when it fails, you will learn whether you were truly being intuitive or not. You see, by practicing magic and sorcery, whether it's alongside an enlightenment practice or afterward, you develop better discernment of your own intuition if you're doing it right. If you're some superstitious moron who thinks that lighting a candle changes the world, you're out of here. You're not going to have this. You're going to have success, but you're not going to have the success. You're not going to see the world with open eyes. You're going to see it with clouded eyes. Remember, all your desires, your needs, your wants, those are merely objects of the dream as well. Those are things you've chosen. Those are reactions you're making to what you've already chosen to be as it is. That's like going to a restaurant, ordering cabbage soup, realizing you hate cabbage soup, and now you're stuck with it. And so you complain to the waiter, they come and give you a different one. But you already made the choice. You already made it this way. Nobody did this to you. You chose for this to be your experience. You could have anything. You chose this. Why? Desires, needs, objections, all of these things, these are objects of the dream. These are things that you're aware of. They are not the source. Your desires and your needs don't cause anything. They're a reaction. Your higher will transcends all of this. Your true will and intention transcends these objects. It inspires these objects. And your true will, your true intention, all of these things transcend these objects. It inspires these objects. And that will and intention, like boldness, is a bridge in the gap between source consciousness and its ultimately manifested appearance. Without will and intention somewhere, these things don't happen or appear to happen. Without will and intention, nothing would manifest. And ultimately, it is all your own will and intention at play here. Not some external being to yourself. It's not somebody else's. You can do it that way. If you want to call it the will of God, fine. You can externalize it if you want, but you're just making it harder on yourself. You must recognize that your personal will and intention is part of that greater will and intention. It is just one facet of it. It's part of the harmonious flow. You're simply ignorant of that personal union with that higher and ultimately impersonal will and intention, because that's why I don't like to deify it. Because it's ultimately an impersonal will. It is a living will, it is consciousness, it is the divine, but it's not a personal being. It transcends personal or impersonal, actually. But it's easier to just call it impersonal just for the conversation, because then you got to explain why it's different. So you're simply ignorant of your personal union with that higher and ultimately impersonal will and intention. You can call it the Tao. I like to call it the Tao, because Taoism got that on point. Taoists understand the will of the divine better than anybody. Just saying. Nobody understands it as well as a Taoist or a Zen Buddhist, perhaps. Like a Chan Buddhist, not a Japanese Zen necessarily, but a good old school, nothing against Zen Buddhism, but a good old fashioned Chan Buddhist, like a Taoist Buddhist. Those guys get it. That's why I like using the Tao as a word, as a concept. So call it the Tao, call it the will of God. So long as you don't separate yourself from that God in any meaningful kind of way, so long as you admit that you're a child of God, not in the familial sense, but the old school sense of like your child is a finger of your hand, they're all connected, it's one thing, and it's just an extant child. It's like a branch off a tree. Why do you think we use family trees, guys? Don't you notice that when we use family trees, it's all a modern convention to separate the names with lines? Originally, we used to take a tree and draw it on the tree. At least in school, that's what we did. We call it a family tree, meaning everything's connected. It's one tree and we're a branch of that tree. If you're a child of God, it's like saying the tree is God and we're all that. We're all branches of the tree. And if you notice, a tree is all branches. Have you ever noticed that? The trunk is just a big branch. By the way, I work at a nursery. I know what I'm saying. A trunk and a branch are basically the same thing. We just call it a branch when it's an offshoot of a trunk. Call it a twig if you want. Same shit. Twig is a baby branch. A branch is a baby trunk or an offshoot trunk. So you're simply ignorant of your personal union. That's it. We're not talking about a biological or family relationship. You are one with the Tao. You just don't always feel it because you're ignorant of how your personal will is a part of that greater flow. Think of it like an eddy in an ocean or a river. The eddy is still the river. It's just something the river is doing in that one spot. You are still the Tao. In other words, the personal you. The personal you is still the Tao, but it is what the Tao is doing here. And it has a will of its own, but that will of its own is perfectly in harmony with the whole. It's a microcosm of the macrocosm. But if you're only aware of that microcosm, you feel like you're in conflict with the whole. And so you decide you want to change reality, not realizing you're already making it the way it is. Anyway, this is where the nihilism of many Enlightenment ontologies comes from, because in that frame of mind, you feel powerless. But then when you realize you're not this person, you're not powerless. You're God shaping the universe. All of us are. We're all participating in our own creation as one being, as one tree with many trunks and twigs and branches. So you are that river, you are that flow, you are that eddy. You are not this physical contraption that they say has a mind. And they don't want you to know this. They want you stuck. They don't want you to realize this, because if you did, you'd know what their trick is. They're trying to get as many people as they can to believe a certain way so that reality is shaped the way they want it to be shaped. They want you relegated to the field of religion and mystical woo if you don't believe their physicality. If you're not a hard secular physicalist, they don't want you in society as a leader. They want you relegated to religion. You can rule the religious roost, but the religious roost barely has anything to do with anything. They don't consult, the guru, sitting in somewhere in Nepal about anything. They don't care if he leads a bunch of people to salvation, because they're taken out of the equation then. They're fine with that. It's only when you start walking into what they consider their cattle pen and start teaching the cows, hey, you know what? You don't have to be in here, by the way. They don't like that. So you get relegated to religion. And if you don't play nice, if they can't get you into regular organized religion where they can control you, then they'll try to shunt you into New Age love and light bullshit, filled with false light, purity spiral bullshit. It's a parade filled with woke scolds and political fools. And this foolishness is so pervasive that when you call it out for doing real damage to the study of metaphysics, you're accused of getting too political. If you say, hey, wokeness does not have a place in true spirituality, that is a social construct. It is not spiritual. It's not metaphysics. Get that out of there. Yeet that shit out. Nope, you must be far right or something. I might even agree with half the shit you're saying, but it doesn't belong in here. And all of this can be so maddening. And it will be in the rearview mirror soon. There is a time coming, I promise you, when a lot of this is going to start to fall apart. It may not be in our personal lifetimes. Some of this may take generations, but it will happen. It has to happen. Otherwise, humanity will go extinct or be enslaved forever to those who know better. You see, the powers that be, they're not materialists or physicalists. Nah. Almost all of them practice tantric sex shit. Almost all, and it's not shit, by the way, to practice tantric sex stuff. I'm saying they practice it in some shitty fucking ways. A lot of them know what I'm talking about and believe what I'm talking about and believe that that gives them a right to rule you because they know reality and you don't. It's sickening to realize that people like Epstein know reality better than the average person listening to this fucking video. That is disgusting. That is how much they have degraded humanity. That the most disgusting, wicked pieces of shit probably have a better understanding of this fundamental fact than you do. Because they wouldn't do what they do with a clear conscience like they do, unless they validated it and rationalized it in that. They know that morality is a social construct. They can do whatever they want because they are God incarnate. They know this. That's why they look down on you, because you don't. This is the fire of the gods that Prometheus brought to man. Not just some biological ability to think clearer, like Enki gave us the blood of Kingu or something. That's obviously a piece of the equation, yes. But the ultimate fire of the gods, the ultimate fire that Zeus wields, is the knowledge that he is immortal. The knowledge that nothing dies, that he defeated death and time itself. That is the ultimate power, the ultimate fire of the gods, is knowing we are all gods. Is it not written, ye are gods, said Jesus to the Pharisees. Anyway, I could go on. I've gone on long enough. I hope you enjoyed this rant. I hope you share it with people with open minds. I hope you're respectful of people who are still learning it. I hope you don't misread my passion and fire for outrage and anger, although I tend to sound that way. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. This is important. I'm not trying to get you to change your mind. I'm just trying to help you wake up. If you don't want to wake up, then don't. We're not enemies because you don't want to wake up. But if you do wake up, or if you recognize that you need to wake up, then you know it's time to ascend, to get your birthright as an avatar of God, just like I am. Anyway, guys, until next time, this is D.H. Thorne. Mind the shadows. They're everywhere.